This is about a project called WebSec on web-driven systems and security for them, which we have with SSF. It's a project that Chalmers has together with Uppsala. Here's the PIs. In addition to me, it's Professor David Sands and Professor Alejandro Russo. Alejandro is here. He has another project, so you'll hear presented later on. And from Uppsala, we have Professor Philip Brummer, whose group is also part of the project. So web security is in the news a lot. And just to give one example of a significant breach, is the Equifax data breach in 2017, which resulted in leaking credentials of hundreds of millions of users in the US. So this is kind of quite one of the major leaks in recent history. Just one of the many that we've seen recently. And in fact, if you track back the problem with this breach, that was very much vulnerability in an open source framework. So this was a typical web vulnerability. If you look around at companies like Google, we see that they have bounty programs, and they pay millions of dollars to researchers that find vulnerabilities. And when they report on the vulnerabilities, turns out that cross-site scripting vulnerabilities are essentially the lion's share for those that they pay bounties for. So it's a hard problem, and still kind of exploited a lot in the wild and found in applications to a large degree. Okay, so how do we deal with these problems? So one of the things to note with the web is that so JavaScript is really at the heart of the web and also source of many security problems. Essentially, what typical thing that you would have in a web application is that it's dynamic, and a lot of dynamicism comes from the JavaScript running in the browser as you process the web application. Increasingly, on the server side, also we have JavaScript running and doing the logic of the application on server side. And on top of that, users like to install browser extensions like AdBlock or password managers that also use JavaScript. Okay, so very powerful execution possibilities, but also enabling attackers if you take over this kind of JavaScript. If you want to have a fun experiment, check out your favorite news portal where you go to, Dagens Nyheter or CNN, and just look for how many scripts are loaded from external sources. And you'll find out it's most of them, and it would be like from hundreds of different domains. So essentially, most of the code you load in the browser comes from third parties. So clearly, that's a security concern. So you see here an example of popular usage of this third-party code. It's a kind of data analytics console. You can track users, what they do. Well, unfortunately, misconfiguring that or using it maliciously can lead to the analytics also collecting secrets like passwords and sending it further. So that's a concern. And at the moment, there is no enforcement against this kind of attacks. So yeah, there are many different ways in which JavaScript can be malicious. So yeah, can have confidentiality, integrity attacks, defacing websites, phishing. So long range of applications. So that's something that we need to deal with. Securing JavaScript is essential, and that's where our project comes into play. So these are the goals of the project. Comprehensive solution for cross-site scripting, both detecting and preventing cross-site scripting. Taking up the challenge of JavaScript, having isolation platforms, monitoring for JavaScript applications. Looking at end-to-end security, so that all this ecosystem with JavaScript or other things can be secured. And building demonstrators with industry to demonstrate practical use cases with that. So just to mention a few research highlights, and then expanding on one of the particular highlights from the past year. So we've done really great on research excellence, and it's quite amazing that within a single project we've published papers in all Big 4 security conferences, so which are extremely competitive. So that's really fantastically done by the team of the project. And covering other areas like web verification programming languages. So we had a lot of interesting results there. On top of that, so many of the papers, they come with tools, which is kind of nice artifacts to start research and further experiments and exploring utilization used on those based on those tools. So yeah, so I'm listing a few of the examples. For example, Black Widow is a new generation of crawling, so that you can crawl much deeper in websites. JS Flow is about tracking information flow in JavaScript. So yeah, Xantrap is about isolating JavaScript that is not trusted. So a lot of kind of interesting tools that came out. What I would like to talk about in particular, since this is the most recent result, is JavaScript that runs in extensions, right? So this is the malicious extensions. Okay, can be malicious, and the data spy attack from quite recent months showed that actually you can plant malicious code in extensions in a way that is not noticed by vendors. So there is a auditing process. If you develop an extension, it gets published in a store, but essentially it turns out that it's not that difficult to bypass the vetting and plant malicious extensions. This is what this data spy extension attack was about, discovering all these leaks that were implemented in those malicious extensions. So some of our project work was about analyzing extensions, but we also noticed that some of the meta information was very interesting kind of to use to identify the maliciousness. So what you see a lot is that malicious developers, they buy reviews. So an extension would have a lot of positive reviews and rankings to boost the ranking so that more people install it. But to do a review, you actually need to be a user, you need to be logged in. It's quite a laborious process to do that. So what we found out, actually there's a much simpler signal that we can use for detecting malicious extensions, and that's number of downloads. Okay, so when you install an extension in Google Chrome Store, it tells you how many downloads it has had so far, so that you know how popular it is. And to download an extension, you don't need to log in. Okay, and that means that this is something that people can manipulate and organize a lot of downloads or buy downloads from various darknet places, and by that promote your extension in a much simpler way. Okay, so since we just saw a presentation about AI, I guess it's kind of hard to find a project that doesn't do AI. So I thought I also mention use of AI in this project. We'll see if there's anybody who's not using AI in the rest of the afternoon. So yeah, that's what we do here. So essentially, we'll look at number of downloads for an extension. We monitor it for half a year every day. And then we see very interesting patterns. Essentially, by clustering these patterns, we realize that some of them behave in extremely similar way. So you see here on this slide, there are two clusters with very strange patterns of downloads. So it doesn't look normal. And indeed, as we start analyzing them, we realize that they all contain malicious extensions. Okay, so it's a signal that gives away, that how these downloads were kind of acquired, and that by itself can drive our further analysis, where we can determine the maliciousness of extensions. So this signal alone allowed us to uncover 326 malicious extensions. So that's great, without any analysis of the code. But combining it with analysis of the code, we can go further and use, for example, code similarity analysis to discover similar extensions that are also malicious. And that's what we also discovered in the officially published web store. Most of these extensions have now been removed, so after we reported it to Google. So yeah, this is what benign extension download patterns look like. You see it's quite different. We've done quite well on utilization, and there's some patterns that come as a result of the project. As I mentioned, we've done well with tools. We reported a lot of vulnerabilities to vendors, to some serious software vendors like WordPress and Chalmers as part of the project. And that's been appreciated and acknowledged in many cases. So we've been collaborating with Chalmers Innovation System to explore this further. And we also produce an educational tool for anybody who wants to learn about information flow, to do it in the form of educational challenges. So if you want to learn more about the project, here's the webpage. Thanks very much.